It's time to get your geek on with Dave Vermillion.
I think we are all set to bring on our very esteemed guest. I met this man up in Seattle at the Emerald City Comic Con, and I was just blown away by his work. I mean, I've seen it before, don't get me wrong, but when you're there in person and you meet this man, you can't help but be impressed. I am speaking, of course, of the one, the only, Joe Corroney. Joe, how are you doing, sir?
Hey, David. I'm doing great. How you guys doing?
We're doing fantastic down here. I want to thank you for taking the time to call us and give us your thoughts on everything that's going on and your art and everything. We do appreciate it.
Sure, no problem. Thanks for having me on.
So let's start at the beginning, which I've been told is a very good place to start. What got you into artistry, and when did you get your first big break?
I have to go way back to 1977 when Star Wars came out. I was barely 4 years old, so at the time, and that was the first movie I remember seeing in the theater. That I'm pretty sure it might have been my very first movie my parents took me to, but it was the first movie in the theater I remember seeing, and that left such a obviously a huge impression on me as a child. It inspired my imagination and my creativity. And also that same summer was my very first comic book, which was the Star Wars Marvel adaptation. So that 1-2 punch of seeing the movie in the theater, and then that July for my birthday, I got the oversized Treasury edition of issue 1 of Star Wars from Marvel Comics. And back then we couldn't relive the movie on VHS or, on demand or anything. You had to actually, the way I relived the film was by reading the comic over and the other comics after that, and then basically drawing the pictures, and then obviously, later that following year when the toys came out. But until the toys came out, I was really just drawing the Star Wars characters from the comic books, and then some other various books my parents have gotten me, merchandising stuff. But yeah, it was really Star Wars was what inspired me to become an artist, and so it's sort of been with me from the very, very beginning. My first big break, in regards to the other part of your question, was probably there's two I can think of. I guess my first one was in 1992, 93, I think. I would have been a sophomore in college, and I got my first gig with a small comic book publisher. So I was still in art college, but I got my first professional gig drawing a comic book for an independent publisher. I didn't really get paid much, if at all, but I got published, so that was a big deal.
It's always fun seeing your name in print for the very first time.
Yeah. Absolutely. And when you're in college, you're just trying to get your name out there, you're trying to get published, and so I was happy just to actually, be ahead of the curve when it came to a lot of my other classmates who hadn't even thought about, what they were going to do after school. I already knew I wanted to be a comic book artist already. So that was one break, and that came, my first comic started to come out in 94, and then again, these are just small publisher stuff. And I was doing some role-playing game art for a couple other small publishers like Champions, the role-playing game, and a couple other small companies. But then my next big break came with Star Wars, probably in 96. A couple years later, I started doing artwork for the Star Wars role-playing game. And that got me noticed with Lucasfilm and some of the other Lucasfilm licensees, which led to me doing even more Star Wars work shortly after for like Star Wars Insider magazine. I started illustrating for Lucasfilm directly. Ooh. So that was my second big break, was getting published with the Star Wars role-playing game.
Now, great writers, they read other writers, and great filmmakers, they study other directors. But as an artist, whom do you admire and study?
A lot of my influences just aren't other illustrators or artists necessarily. They tend to be, I do have those for sure, and actually there are a lot of good friends of mine who I look up to, whose work that I study, guys like Mark Ratz and Jerry Vanderstelt, and these are big name, big league illustrator guys. Guys like Drew Struzan, who's probably one of my biggest influences, and then some of my contemporaries and friends who are also Star Wars illustrators. I look up to those guys and study their work too. And then, I look at filmmakers, even musicians, for their creativity or work ethic, but also filmmakers, because I'm a big movie buff. I've done some film and in college, and I had intentions of going off to Hollywood one day to work in film with my artwork, but it didn't quite coalesce the way I wanted, so I ended up kind of falling back on the illustration career. But I still study a lot of filmmakers, because I don't consider myself just an artist, but also a storyteller with my art, because I do a lot of comic book art. I do a lot of narrative illustrations. So I study a lot of film directors, and Lucas, of course, Spielberg, all those guys, Tarantino, Coppola, Scorsese, all those, all the big names. But even the newer directors, of course, I love film. I love comic books.
Now, the Solo movie, speaking of being back to Star Wars here, Solo movie comes out next week, which has been a bit of a polarizing film, depending on which side of the fence you're on. Some are wondering why we are even having a Solo movie. Some just aren't excited, because they're just like, whatever. But what are your thoughts on the film?
They could make a Star Wars movie. They could make Pondo Baba a Star Wars story. I would go see it. Like, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, so any excuse for a Star Wars film, hey, count me in. I think it's a great reason. If the story is there, and you got talented guys like, Lawrence Kasdan who really wants to write a Han Solo movie, then heck yeah, bring it on. That's Larry Kasdan. He knows the character inside and out. Let's make a movie. Granted, I get that it's Han Solo, it's Harrison Ford, those are huge shoes to fill to begin with. Then you get an iconic character who's, you don't really want to mess with that too much. I understand the trepidation from the fan base, and we don't want to fall into that prequel territory again, like we did with the. Even though I love all the Star Wars films, the prequels do have their. I know they have their faults, but so there's that aspect. We don't want another prequel. We don't really want to replace Harrison Ford, but at the same time, I think if you let go of some of those preconceptions, I think as a fan you might just. I haven't seen the film. I'm going to see it next week in Phoenix with actually. This is crazy. I'm going to see it with Jeremy Bullock, Boba Fett himself. So we're both going to be there for. I'm going to go see Solo with Boba Fett. How crazy is that?
Okay, when you see Jeremy, you need to ask him about the time that he got a Texas-sized belt buckle.
I will absolutely do that.
This is a true story. He's been on our show before, and he told me that in his 50 years of work, his one regret is that he never got to do a Western. And when he came to the Alamo City Comic-Con, I presented him with an engraved belt buckle the size of a hubcap.
Oh my God!
And it says it said Jeremy Bullock on top and his Boba Fett on bottom. It was perfect.
That is awesome. That is so cool. Yeah, I will definitely. I'll nudge him about that one. Every time I see him, he gives me a hard time. We always joke around, but we've known each other for years, so that'll be funny. I'll have to rib him about that.
We're speaking with Joe Corroney here on 9:30 a.m. The Answer on Get Your Geek On. Joe, now speaking of Solo, do you have any Solo related art that you're working on?
I do. I have really just concepts right now that are in with Lucasfilm, so nothing I can really talk about specifically, or even say for 100% sure that it's coming out at this point. But I have been working with Lucasfilm on concepts for some of their fine art divisions. This is like licensing art for Solo. Some of it's merchandising art too. So we'll see. I should know within the next week if this is stuff that's going to be coming out or not. But if it doesn't, there's other there's other projects. Not everything. Sometimes I'll pitch stuff to Lucasfilm, or they'll contact me and have me pitch stuff, and then it has to go through the channels and approvals, and then hopefully some of it sticks, some of it doesn't, so we'll find out.
Now, you've drawn for Marvel and DC and Star Trek and Charmed and Game of Thrones and little Doctor Who, in addition to Star Wars, but is there one franchise out there that you haven't drawn for that you'd love to sink your brushes into?
Well, I'm a huge geek of pretty much everything. I mean, I love all this stuff. I mean, it all sort of begins and ends with Star Wars, but in between all that, I love Star Trek. I've worked on Star Trek for 20 years now with CBS and a lot of their licensors. Besides Star Trek, and I've done Doctor Who. I'm a huge X-Files fan. I've worked on X-Files. I think, even though I've done stuff for Marvel and DC on occasion from time to time, I would always love to do more for those guys because, well, one, for DC, I'm a huge Batman fan, huge. So to be able to actually contribute on a more of a scale that would make a little bit more of an impact on Batman, something cool. I don't know. It could be covers for the comics or posters or who knows what. But I love Batman, so anything with that. I'm a huge Marvel guy too. I grew up on Marvel comics, so I've done Marvel stuff. But again, it's all been kind of like scattershot here and there. But I love Captain America. That's one of my favorite characters. So yeah, I would say, especially with the Marvel films, the way Marvel Studios has been just knocking them out of the park. To do anything with Marvel Studios for the film versions of the characters, that would be awesome. So,
all right, well, we have Kevin Feige on speed dial. Come on, let's make this happen here. He swore he'd stop taking my calls, but I think he was just kind of playing hard to get. So
yeah.
So we're speaking with Joe Corroney here on 9:30 a.m. The Answer and Get Your Geek On. Joe, you are headed, you said, to Phoenix next week for the Phoenix Comic-Con. Where can people learn more about what you do and have some art shipped home?
Well, if you come to Phoenix, it's they actually changed the name this year. It's Phoenix Comic Fest. So if you come to that next week, next Memorial Day, and you can see me in person, and I can tell you all about what I do, and even better, I can show you pretty much everything that I do because I'll have all my artwork there. So yeah, I'll be on the main floor. I'll have a booth. I think it's like 727 or something like that on the main floor at Phoenix Comic Fest next weekend. But yeah, if you want to look me up and follow me online, I'm pretty easy to find. Just go to joecorroney.com, and then you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. All that stuff is linked on my site. I'm pretty easy to find online. So.
Awesome, and we're going to put that link into the chat here so that everybody that's listening and watching us here on Facebook.com/GYGR Radio can follow along and can go right over to the website. Joe, we want to thank you for taking time out of what has to be a very, very, very busy day to talk with us here. I can't wait to shake your hand again, sir. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, I look forward to meeting you again. It was fun hanging out with you in Seattle at Emerald City, and my girlfriend Ashley and I were having fun geeking out with you about anime and movies and stuff, so that was really fun. So it was great meeting you there.
With any luck, we'll see if we can get you down to San Antonio here in October, and then we'll see you again in Chicago next April.
Oh, yeah, Celebration next April. I'll definitely be there. But, yeah, hopefully I'll see you in San Antonio, too, if I make it.
All right, thanks, Joe. Have a good rest of the day.
All right, thank you.